My son went missing for 2 years. Then I found out the terrifying truth. The day my son disappeared was the day my world ended. One moment, he was just a regular 16-year-old boy, and the next, he was gone, vanished without a trace. The police searched, I searched, but as time passed, hope started slipping away. 2 years, 2 whole years of nightmares, dead ends, and unanswered questions. And then, I found him. But the truth of where he had been, it was worse than I ever could have imagined. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now, let's start the video. The day my son disappeared started like any other. It was a regular Tuesday morning. Nothing unusual, nothing out of the ordinary. I made breakfast while he rushed to get ready for school, stuffing his books into his backpack like he always did. "Mom, I'm gonna be late," he called out, grabbing a piece of toast on his way out the door. I laughed, rolling my eyes. "Maybe if you woke up on time, you wouldn't be." He grinned at me, and that was the last time I saw his smile. I remember the exact moment I knew something was wrong. It was around 4 p.m., and he still wasn't home. Normally, he'd text me if he was hanging out with friends or staying late for something, but my phone stayed silent. I tried calling, no answer. I told myself not to panic. Maybe his phone had died. Maybe he was just caught up with something. But by 6 p.m., I knew. I just knew. A mother's instinct is never wrong. I called his friends. None of them had seen him after school. I called the school. He had left on time, like usual. I called the police. That was the moment my world shattered. The next few days were a blur of panic, fear, and waiting. The police asked their questions. Did he have any problems at home? Number. Did he have a reason to run away? Number. Could he have been involved in something dangerous? No, he was a good kid. He had dreams, plans, a future. He wouldn't just leave me, but as the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, everyone around me started to move on. The police had no leads. His case turned cold. But I never stopped looking. I spent nights scrolling through missing persons forums, posting in every group I could find. I followed every possible lead, even the ridiculous ones. I printed thousands of flyers and hung them in every town within 100 miles. I refused to give up, because deep down, I knew. He was still out there somewhere. Then, 2 years later, I got a call that changed everything. I was sitting in my kitchen, staring at the same cold cup of coffee I had reheated 3 times, when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Most of the calls I got these days were either from reporters looking for a new angle on my tragic story, or from people with cruel false leads that sent me on wild goose chases. But something about this number, it felt different. I picked up. "Mrs. Carter?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar. A man, stern, professional. "This is Detective Ramos with the Denver Police Department. I need you to come in immediately." My heart stopped. Denver? That was nearly 800 miles away. "Is this about my son?" My voice cracked. I hadn't spoken his name out loud in weeks. The detective hesitated. "I think it's best if we speak in person." That was all I needed to hear. I grabbed my keys and was on the road within an hour, driving through the night with nothing but adrenaline and desperation keeping me awake. My mind raced with possibilities. Had they found him? Was he alive? Safe? The thought that he might not be, that thought I refused to entertain. By the time I arrived at the police station, the sun was just starting to rise. My hands were shaking as I walked in, and when I saw Detective Ramos waiting for me, I knew. Something was very wrong. He led me to a small, windowless room and slid a file across the table. "We believe we've located your son," he said, his voice carefully measured. "But there's something you need to know." I opened the file, and the first thing I saw was a grainy surveillance photo of a teenage boy. His hair was longer, his face thinner, but those eyes, I'd know them anywhere. It was him, my son, my baby, alive. But beneath that photo, there were others, pictures of him with people I didn't recognize. A man with a scar on his cheek, a woman with cold, calculating eyes. And then, the last photo, one that made my stomach drop. My son standing outside a rundown building, talking to a man in a suit. A man I did recognize. Because he was my husband, my ex-husband, the man who had walked out on us 10 years ago. I looked up at the detective, my hands trembling. "What the hell is going on?" Detective Ramos leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Your ex-husband, how much do you know about his life after he left?" I blinked, my mind racing. "Nothing," I admitted. He disappeared. One day he was there, the next he wasn't. No calls, no letters, no child support. He never tried to see our son. My voice caught in my throat. I thought he was just gone. The detective exhaled sharply. He wasn't gone, he was hiding. I gripped the edge of the table. From what? He hesitated. Then he pulled another file from his bag and laid it in front of me. Inside were court documents, financial records, criminal reports. As I skimmed through them, a sick feeling settled in my stomach. My ex-husband had been involved in something dangerous. He had been tied to fraud, money laundering, and even human trafficking. My whole body went cold. He's been under federal investigation for years, Ramos continued. And 2 years ago, just before your son disappeared, he resurfaced. I shook my head. No way. He had nothing to do with this. He wouldn't, but I couldn't even finish my sentence. Because deep down, I knew what the detective was implying. I had spent 2 years searching for my son, believing he had been taken, lost, or worse. But the truth was somehow even more devastating. My son hadn't been kidnapped. He had left. And he had left to be with him. My hands clenched into fists. Where is he now? Ramos leaned back, watching me carefully. That's the problem. We don't know. Your son has been seen in and out of various locations tied to your ex-husband, but they never stay in one place for long. The last sighting was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks, my son was out there, alive, breathing, but in his hands. And I was going to get him back. I don't remember leaving the police station. 1 second, I was sitting across from Detective Ramos, my whole world crumbling around me, and the next, I was outside, gasping for air. My ex-husband had my son. He had him this whole time, 2 years. 2 years of me thinking my baby was lost, taken, or worse. And all along, he had chosen to leave. Number? I refused to believe that. My son wouldn't just walk away from me, not unless he had no choice. I forced myself to focus. The police had leads, but leads weren't enough. They were moving too slow. My son could be anywhere by the time they figured out their next step. I needed to act. I got into my car, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I had spent the last 2 years searching for my son as if he was a missing person. But now, I knew who had him. That changed everything. I dug through my glove compartment, my hands shaking as I pulled out an old address book. I hadn't spoken to anyone from my ex's side of the family in years, but I knew one thing. His younger brother Jason had always been the weak link. He was the one who couldn't keep a secret. If anyone knew where my ex-husband was hiding, it was him. I dialed the number, my breath shallow as the phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then, a groggy voice answered. "Hello?" "Jason," I said, forcing steel into my voice. "It's me, and I need to know where my son is." There was a long silence. Then he sighed. "I was wondering when you'd call." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Jason hesitated. "Look, I don't know exactly where they are, but I know they've been moving a lot. And I know one thing. He's keeping your kid close, not letting him out of sight." "Why?" I demanded. Jason sighed again. "Because he's afraid you'll take him back." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. My ex-husband knew I was looking for him. He knew I'd never stop. And now I knew something too. He was running out of places to hide, and I was about to find him. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was racing with everything Jason had told me. If my ex-husband was moving my son around constantly, that meant he was scared of getting caught, scared of losing control. That meant I still had a chance to get my son back, but I had to be smart. I had to be faster than him. I needed a solid lead, and I needed it now. I spent the next few hours scouring every piece of information I had about my ex, digging through old records, social media, anything that could give me a clue. That's when I found it. A small real estate transaction under a fake name, linked to an address just outside of Albuquerque. It was registered 2 months ago, a temporary spot, a hideout. But it was something. I wasn't going to waste another second. I got into my car and started driving, my hands gripping the wheel with so much force my fingers ached. The highway stretched endlessly in front of me, but my mind was already at that house, picturing every possible scenario. Would my son be there? Would he be there? And what would I even say if I saw my boy after 2 years? The thought nearly shattered me, but I forced myself to stay focused. The only thing that mattered was getting him back. I reached the outskirts of Albuquerque, just as the sky started turning that eerie shade of purple before dawn. The address led me to a small, run-down house on the edge of a deserted road, surrounded by dry, dead grass and a chain-link fence. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I parked a few houses down and watched. No lights, no movement. But there was a car in the driveway, a black SUV with tinted windows. That alone told me I was in the right place. My ex had always been paranoid, always covering his tracks. I took a deep breath, checking my phone. No signal, no backup, just me. And then, as I was trying to figure out my next move, the front door opened. My breath caught in my throat as I saw him. My son. Standing in the doorway, looking out toward the street. His hair was longer, his face older, but it was him. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle, ready to step out, ready to run to him, to call his name. But before I could, someone else stepped outside. My ex. He placed a hand on my son's shoulder, guiding him back inside. My stomach twisted with rage. My son looked up at him, and for a split second, I saw something in his eyes. Hesitation, uncertainty, maybe even fear. And then, just like that, they were gone, the door shutting behind them. I clenched my fists so tight my nails dug into my palms. I had found them, and I wasn't leaving without my son. I forced myself to breathe, to think. I couldn't just barge in there without a plan. My ex was unpredictable, and if he had kept our son away from me for 2 years, he wasn't going to just hand him over now. I needed to be careful. I needed to be smarter than him. I stayed in my car watching the house for any signs of movement. The longer I sat there, the more I noticed. How the blinds were drawn tight like he didn't want anyone looking inside. How the car in the driveway had dust settled on the hood, meaning it hadn't been driven in at least a few days. He was lying low, hiding. That meant he was afraid. My fingers hovered over my phone. I could call the police, tell them I'd found my son, let them handle it. But then I remembered the detective's words. Without solid proof, without a warrant, it would take time to get them to act. Time I didn't have. And if my ex got even a hint that I was onto him, he would disappear again. I couldn't risk it. I had to get my son now. I slid out of my car and moved toward the house, keeping to the shadows. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I pushed forward. I reached the side of the house and crouched low beneath a window. Slowly, carefully, I lifted myself just enough to peek inside. My breath caught in my throat. There he was, my son, sitting on an old couch, staring at a TV that wasn't even on. His shoulders slumped, his expression blank. He looked tired, defeated, like a kid who had long stopped hoping for something better. A lump rose in my throat. He was right there, just a few feet away from me. I could end this right now, break the window, grab him, run. But then I heard footsteps. My ex walked into the room, carrying a plate of food. My son barely looked up. My ex said something I couldn't hear, and my son just nodded. My stomach twisted with rage. This man, this monster, had stolen 2 years of my child's life, had made him believe this was normal, that this was home. I clenched my fists. No more waiting. No more playing it safe. I was getting my son back. Tonight. I moved toward the back door, my mind racing. I had no idea what I was walking into, no idea how this was going to end. But one thing was certain. I wasn't leaving without my son. I pressed my ear against the back door, listening for any movement inside. My hands were shaking, my pulse pounding so loud I could barely think straight. But I couldn't hesitate now. I twisted the doorknob. It was locked. Of course it was locked. My mind raced. I had no key, no tools, nothing. But I had to get in. Then I saw it, a small, cracked basement window near the ground, just wide enough for me to squeeze through. I dropped to my knees, took a deep breath, and slid inside. The basement was dark and smelled like dust and mold. I moved carefully, feeling my way through old boxes and furniture, my heart hammering with every step. Above me, I could hear the low hum of voices, my ex and my son, talking about something I couldn't make out. I crept up the wooden stairs, pausing at the top. The door was slightly open. I could see the back of my ex's head as he sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. My son was still on the couch in the living room, staring at the dark TV screen. I didn't think. I couldn't think. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. My son turned his head first, his eyes widening in disbelief. He blinked like he wasn't sure if I was real. And then, barely above a whisper, he said, "Mom?" My ex spun around, his face twisted in shock, then rage. "What the hell?" I didn't give him a chance to finish. "We're leaving, now." He shot up from his chair. "You think you can just walk in here and—" I moved fast, stepping between him and my son. "I don't think, I know." My voice was steady, but my entire body was on fire with fear and fury. "You took him from me. You stole 2 years of his life. It ends tonight." He laughed, shaking his head. "You have no idea what you're doing." But I did. I knew exactly what I was doing. I pulled out my phone, my finger hovering over the dial pad. "One call," I said. "One call, and the cops will be here in minutes. You know I have proof now. You know they'll take my side." For the first time, I saw hesitation flicker across his face. He wasn't in control anymore, and he knew it. I turned to my son. "Get your things, baby. We're going home." He hesitated, just for a second. But then he nodded. He stood, his hands trembling as he grabbed a small backpack from the floor. My ex stepped toward us, but I held up my phone. "Don't!" My voice was ice. "You know what happens if you try." He stopped, his jaw clenched. He looked at our son, then back at me. "Fine," he spat. "Take him, but this isn't over." I didn't respond. I just grabbed my son's hand and pulled him toward the door. My heart was slamming against my ribs, but I kept moving. Step by step, we walked out of that house, into the night, into freedom. The moment we got in the car, my son turned to me, his eyes glossy with unshed tears. "I thought you forgot about me," he whispered. My heart shattered. I pulled him into the tightest hug of my life. "Never," I choked out. "I never stopped looking, never stopped loving you, never, ever again." As I drove away, my hands still shaking on the wheel, I realized something. This wasn't just about getting him back. This was about making sure he never had to go through that again. No more hiding, no more fear, just us, finally free. If there's one thing this nightmare taught me, it's that a mother's love doesn't fade. It doesn't break. It doesn't stop, no matter how much time passes. If you ever feel like you've lost someone you love, don't give up. Keep fighting. Keep searching. Because sometimes love is the only thing strong enough to bring them home. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing. It's free, it helps the channel, and it lets us keep sharing these powerful stories with you. Let's keep growing this amazing community together. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.